I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. At a press briefing on Wednesday, Republican senators led by Chuck Grassley slammed a rise in violent crime. The senators, including John Barrasso and Joni Ernst, blamed Biden administration policies and the defund the police movement for an uptick in murders and robberies being experienced around the country. Rising crime is a signature GOP issue going into the midterms, with Republicans pinning the blame on Democratic policies and progressive prosecutors in major urban areas. Democrats counter that crime spikes are a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and that Republicans have voted against federally supported police budgets. Let's listen in.
Crime in America. It's something I hear in my town meetings in Iowa, and I'm sure people in larger cities hear it even more than we do in our part of the country. Violent crime is very much on the rise. Homicides up 30%. Carjackings doubled and tripled in some cities, and those are only a couple statistics of many different statistics we could give. Violence is up in the blue cities, is due to depolicing, progressive prosecutors, and failed bail reforms. Can you imagine prosecutors saying we aren't going to prosecute this crime or that crime? Now, we all know there has to be prosecutorial discretion, but you don't tell people what crimes you aren't going to punish, or why do you get a big rise in those crimes in the big cities of America. Now, with this rise in crime in the larger cities, Democrats blame that rise on violence also in red states with higher crime rates. But the data show that blue cities in these states cause the crime. So set aside blue cities, and red states are much, much safer. Law enforcement is under attack at an alarming rate. More law enforcement officers were killed in 2021 than any year since the disaster of 9/11. Iowa is in 2021 had 9 law enforcement officers dying. The Biden crime plan is, as you know, gun control. That will not reduce crime. We also have this fentanyl problem. Democrats are fighting the scheduling of fentanyl. And why? I don't know, because fentanyl kills so many people. Probably 70,000 of the 104,000 that were died because of drug overdose. We must back the blue and take crime more seriously than this administration is doing. The Biden administration can no longer ignore what Iowans and Americans are living through every day. Every time we see a policeman, we ought to thank them. I am not for defunding police. I think it would also help, tying this in with some of the demonstrations that we've seen lately about the Supreme Court. The president should back the institutions of the courts. He doesn't do that by being quiet on recent attempts by crowds to intimidate our justices on the Roe case. It would help if the president would speak up, because respect for the Supreme Court has something to do with respect for law, and I think we have this rising crime because there's been a disregard of the respect for law. Senator Barrasso.
Well, crime continues to rise and spike all across the United States. You have seen the numbers. We're at near 25-year highs on crime, violent crimes. Talking about robbery, murder, all across the country, and Senator Grassley just mentioned drug crime. The CDC numbers came out today, 107,000 drug overdose deaths last year in the United States. Those are the numbers. But when you see statistics like this, people are clearly anxious for their own personal safety, their own well-being. So it's no surprise that only 1 out of 3 Americans trust Joe Biden and trust the Democrats on the entire issue of crime. The Democrats have failed America. And when you take a look at the fact that there are prosecutors who choose to not prosecute crimes and publish lists of crimes they're not going to prosecute, there's no surprise that you see more of those crimes being committed. When you see big city mayors say we're going to cut the funding of police and defund the police for over $1 billion last year, there's no surprise that their crime waves are turning into tidal waves in those cities. And when you have every member of the Senate Democrats on the floor voting to confirm to the Justice Department and to this administration, people who have actively gone out to fight against the police have recommended people pay bond money, contribute to getting criminals out of jail, and have done everything they can to say defund the police, and yet the Democrats vote to confirm them. And then what do we see this past week? I mean, it's not just the Democrats turning a blind eye to crime. The Attorney General of the United States came out this past week with his comprehensive plan for environmental justice. What about a comprehensive plan from the Attorney General for crime, for drug crime, for violent crime, for murder? No comprehensive plan on any of those things. No, you're not going to see it from this administration. Their comprehensive plan is on environmental justice. That's their agenda. This week is National Police Week. We should do all we can to thank the police officers. We should defend the police, not defund the police. The people of Wyoming have great respect for the police officers, the men and women of our communities who put their lives on the line every day to keep us safe. And what we hear from the Democrats in the administration is not that. But on behalf of Republicans and behalf of a great, great majority of Americans, we are very grateful for what the police do every day to help keep our country safe.
I want to speak for a moment about how the problems at our southern border are affecting law enforcement officers in Indiana and across the country. According to the National Center for Health Statistics, more than 100,000 Americans died of drug overdoses during the pandemic's first year. 100,000 Americans. That's double the figure from 2015. And more than were killed in car crashes and gun fatalities. A huge contributor to that number, we know, is the drug fentanyl. Most of the supplies of fentanyl comes across our southwestern border. Now, it's usually laced into another drug, so people have no idea what they're taking until it's too late. But don't take my word for it. Let me share how this crisis is affecting Hoosiers. When discussing fentanyl overdoses, the sheriff in Brown County said, "The toll it takes on the community is terrible and continues to get worse." A representative from the LaPorte County Coroner's Office told my staff about the prevalence of fentanyl in drug-related cases. She said the substance has been associated with approximately 98% of all drug overdose deaths in the county. In Marion County, where Indianapolis is located, they had 641 fentanyl deaths in 2021. The coroner in my home county, Johnson County, reports 95% of their drug overdoses that led to deaths involve fentanyl. Earlier this week, the police department in Plainfield, Indiana, announced a substantial fentanyl drug bust and issued a warning, calling it very serious, addictive, and a deadly drug that the police department has seen firsthand destroy families and communities. This has to stop. Where is our president? Where's the administration? We have a tragic crisis in our midst, and It affects all ages, all backgrounds, all communities, and it is self-imposed, imposed by a president wedded to a far-left ideology that doesn't believe in border security. We have to secure the border. The surge in illegal border crossings over the past years forced Customs and Border Protection to shift resources away from drug interdiction to processing migrants. You know, maybe I'm just drawing too much on good old Hoosier common sense, but that seems off to me. It seems off to most of my constituents. Our border crisis, though, is of course a nationwide crisis. Fentanyl flowing through our southern border is affecting communities across Indiana and across our country. It's not a red problem or a blue problem. This is a red, white, and blue challenge that can be easily addressed. We have to do better. The president has to do better. Let's secure our southern border and help our law enforcement community today.
Yes, first, Senator Grassley, thank you for bringing us together and for being such a strong proponent of our law enforcement officials, and to my colleagues that are here today to honor the men and women in blue as well. Folks, last election cycle, we did see a lot of anti-law enforcement rhetoric. It played out in my own campaign, where we had folks on the left that were out there chanting, defund the police, defund the police. It was the popular thing to do, to really go after the men and women that are on our streets protecting our citizens. And we've heard it, abolish ICE, go soft on crime. And they were serious. They were serious in their campaign cycle. And so what do we see now? The result of that anti-law enforcement rhetoric. We have seen our men and women in law enforcement be villainized. We have seen them attacked. Senator Grassley just mentioned those in law enforcement that were killed in Iowa in this past year. We've seen the liberal district attorneys failing to prosecute even the most serious of crimes. Officers on our border, just as Senator Young mentioned, they are overwhelmed with people flooding across the border. They're outnumbered, and as a result, we have seen violent crime surging across our country. Last year, the murder rate hit its highest point in a quarter of a century. And the New York Times just recently reported in an article that men and women that live and work in the city are afraid to go back to work in this post-pandemic world because of the surge in crime. They are afraid they will be attacked or harassed on their commute to work. That's from the New York Times. And during National Police Week, all of us, I want to thank and honor the men and women in blue. I know all of us want to do that. They work hard to keep us safe. I did a law enforcement roundtable a number of weeks ago in Iowa with men and women of local police departments, of our sheriff's departments, and of the Iowa State Patrol. I'm really proud of those men and women for stepping up during a difficult time. And they acknowledged it has been a difficult time. Recruiting for men and women going into law enforcement is extremely difficult because of the rhetoric that has been put out there by the people on the left. These are men and women that will do anything to protect us, even putting their own lives in danger. And we're having a hard time bringing them into the fold to support our communities because of what the left has done. So instead of bending to the liberal left, we should have a president that is standing up for the men and women in blue. And so we're imploring that President Biden step up and do the right thing by supporting these men and women and taking crime seriously in the United States. Our laws need to be enforced. Our law enforcement needs to be supported, and the perpetrators need to be held accountable.
Thank you, Senator Grassley, for organizing this today. This is such a special week. It's in honor of our law enforcement men and women, National Police Week, and it really gives us an opportunity to show our gratitude, to show our appreciation to the men and women who serve their communities every single day. I think it's also an opportunity for us to highlight really the stark crisis that law enforcement officers across this country are facing right now. We've seen a lot of rhetoric against the police and also against the important work that they do. And that has an impact on local agencies, local communities. For the past 2 years, we've seen retirements and resignations that continue to climb. We know that recruitment numbers are down. I recently had conversations with some law enforcement in the state of Nebraska, and they say they are receiving fewer applications. In fact, the application numbers for some law enforcement communities is down 75% or more across the state of Nebraska. This contributes to hiring challenges that we know that police officers' jobs have also become much more dangerous. We have seen surges in violence and aggression towards police officers. 346 police officers were shot in the line of duty. 346. And 130 of them were targeted and shot in ambush-style attacks. 60 Minutes recently on their program, they had FBI Director Christopher Wray speak, and he said there is a 59% increase in the murders of police officers, with 73 officers killed in 2021. That's a rate of about one police officer killed every 5 days. Anti-police rhetoric has diminished morale. It has eroded public trust in our law enforcement. And these factors, I believe, have contributed to a massive crime wave that we are seeing all across this country. The administration's response has been weak. That cannot continue. We've had members of our party, Senator Cassidy is one, who has a resolution that really would get to what we should be doing, that I support. And it demands that the President work with Congress on a comprehensive strategy that's going to encourage the Department of Justice, the Department of Homeland Security, as well as state and local law enforcement officers to counter the rise in violent crime by reinforcing strong criminal justice policies. And the Senate needs to pass that resolution. We need to step forward and show that it is time to stop the rhetoric on defunding the police, and instead we need to honor the men and women who serve us every day, and really to address the public safety crisis that we see facing this country.
Any questions on the crime problem?
I was part of so speaking of public safety, you just mentioned that the protests were not outside of just this point. So can you elaborate on the connection between those protests and current trends and crime in the country that we are seeing right now? And also, what do you think about the administration's response?
I think it's pretty simple. When you don't control the borders, and fentanyl is just one drug that comes across that border. comes from China to Mexico into the United States, but other drugs come from other countries across the Rio Grande. And when that happens, it's one thing for people to come to our country violating our laws, but to bring drugs in, it makes every problem for not just the border states, but for all of the states of the United States and the statistics on crime.
Her question was about the connection between violent crime and the intimidation at the Supreme Court.
You sure didn't make that very clear. You know, remind me of a question I got in Medicaid in a town meeting, and I answered it for 5 minutes, and the woman told me that I'm talking about Medicare, not Medicaid. So any of you can stop me if I'm answering the wrong question. Well, I think when you have the President of the United States being quiet on the demonstrations that are going on, which are nothing more than to intimidate the Supreme Court for political reasons, when the Supreme Court needs to be independent and make decisions based on the Constitution and the laws, and at the top of our country, you don't have a president speaking up against that and supporting the courts. I think there's just one example, but that's a big example of what has caused morale within the police department to go down, and the defunding argument that goes with it, and making it very difficult to fill vacancies in Supreme Courts and things of that nature. That's the connection that I put to that.
Following up on that, there's going to be a huge manifestation on Saturday here in Washington and in other cities in the country. Do you think there could be security concerns that maybe violence could come from these manifestations
Well,
around the country?
that's a question on speculation. Even if I was in law enforcement, you might not know that for sure, but they'd know more about that than I do. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
The White House has called your investigation into Mayor Garcetti a partisan hit job today. Do you have any response to that? And I'd like to ask why your Democratic colleagues should trust your report as face value as public interest.
Is this on the Los Angeles?
Yes.
Well, I think, first of all, my reputation for doing oversight work, if nothing more. You found out how wrong the Democrats were on that, and the Main Street media on that, when for 2.5 years they said our investigation of Hunter Biden was Russian disinformation, and then they ended up being the peddling of misinformation, Russian disinformation, and finally the New York Times and the Washington Post acknowledging that. So you get to the work of my committee and the respect it has, and I'm not saying drawing any more conclusions that just except for this one senator. There's 99 other senators can read the report and draw whatever they want from it, and I'm not dictating to it, and I'm not holding it up anymore. It can go ahead on its own merits.
Do you have a response to the White House claiming it's a partisan hit job?
Well, I don't have that reputation for doing partisan hit jobs.
Thank you.